There were three doctor friends who were taking a stroll at the Marina Beach in Chennai early one morning, and they noticed a person walking towards them with a slight limp. So the first doctor surmised that it could probably be plantar fasciitis. The second doctor took a hard look and said, no, I think that's transient synovitis. And the third decided to guess. He said, look, to me it looks like early stage arthritis. And they waited for the person to come closer, and before they could even open their mouth and ask him anything, the person asked the doctors, excuse me, can you tell me where the cobbler is, because my slipper seems to have cut. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure many of you may have heard this rather interesting anecdote, but there is an underlying message. And the message is that diagnosis can be extremely tricky to even the best medical minds. A simple headache could be just migraine, or it could be a brain tumor. Ordering scans can lead to accusations of an unholy nexus with diagnostic centers, and haven't we heard enough of this already? Not ordering these tests, relying only on clinical examination, can be extremely dicey and fraught with legal risks. So see, either way, doctors are damned. Now, in my life, I have seen some absolutely brilliant doctors who inspire confidence in their patients. And I can definitely, in Chennai, name some of them. Dr. Biswa Kumar, eminent neurologist. Dr. Nandkumar Sundaram, orthopedic surgeon. Dr. K.P. Suresh Kumar, cardiologist. Now, these are doctors who are bang on with their diagnosis. But obviously, that's a gift and that's a blessing. And not everyone may be endowed with that. So before I delve into my presentation today, I want to cut to the chase right away. The big question that would be agitating a lot of us today is whether doctors are still under the new Consumer Protection Act 2019, which was only recently notified and came into effect from the month of July this year. The answer is yes, according to my interpretation. Please remember that the 1986 Act, when it first came into being, had section 210, which listed various services which came under its ambit. And of course, we know that the Supreme Court and IMA versus VP Shanta in 1995, after that, doctors were actually brought under the Consumer Protection Act. There was a lot of opposition. I remember being a student of law college then, going and speaking at a debate on this in the Madras Medical College, and we got a lot of people who were booing us initially because we had to take a stand against the doctors in that debate, luck of the draw. But of course that stayed. Now if you look at the new act, the equivalent of section 210 is section 242, 2 clause 42, which has an inclusive list. Now the devil is always in the details, and the devil in the detail here is not limited to. So a lot of people actually saw this list. They say, you shouldn't Google your symptoms. I would ask doctors also not to Google legal provisions and rely on lawyers to interpret it, jurists to interpret it, because what's mentioned here, while various categories have been mentioned in this list, the words not limited to appear on this. So as of now, in my opinion, doctors are still under the Consumer Protection Act. There's no change from the earlier act and now. The other big question is whether this act will operate prospectively or retrospectively. Very recently, the President of the National Consumer Disputes Redressal Commission in New Delhi clarified, and that was put out on the website, that it will operate prospectively, which means whatever cases you had earlier will stay where they are. Now, it's often a big toss-up, ladies and gentlemen. A patient battling for life and desperate family members rustling up all the money they can for a surgery versus a corporate hospital that insists on advance payment and legally vetted consent forms. Now, I come to consent forms later in my presentation. This does not seem like even Stevens, does it? Ever since doctors were brought under the ambit of the Consumer Protection Act, there has been a delicate balance that has had to be struck. On the one hand, as laid down by the Supreme Court in that landmark case of Dr. Kunal Saha. Remember, a doctor himself who sued a hospital for the death of his wife. The Supreme Court said Doctors are to be dealt with strictly if they are found to be negligent with patients who come to them pawning all their money with the hope to live a better life. Along with hospitals being vicariously liable as held by the Apex Court in V. Krishnakumar versus State of Tamil Nadu. On the other hand, ladies and gentlemen, is a practical view that the Supreme Court took in Jacob Matthew versus State of Punjab in 2005. And the Supreme Court said, a surgeon with shaky hands under fear of legal action cannot perform a successful operation. And a quivering physician cannot administer the end dose of medicine to his patient. Now, this is a judgment. Of course, it pertains to a criminal case of Section 304 of the Indian Penal Code, 304A of the Indian Penal Code. And it's cited in many arguments in several courts, especially in the consumer courts. The rationale is that the greater the risk in the operation, the higher the chances of success, as opposed to lesser risk but higher chances of failure. Now, what really constitutes medical negligence is something that we have to actually grapple with. In my opinion, medical negligence involves, for instance, I'll give you a list, an inclusive list: amputating the wrong leg, operating on the wrong eye, leaving forceps inside the abdomen, prescribing drugs with serious side effects without taking into consideration allergies and the physical condition of patients, contraindication of drugs, needless procedures, botching up a simple cataract operation, for instance, leading to blindness. These would be clear cases of medical negligence where the legal principle of res ipsa loquitur, the thing speaks for itself, would apply. But we know, and I would like to reassure doctors, the majority of doctors are absolutely ethical, they are lifesavers. I take my hats off when it comes to such doctors, and we do know that no doctor would ever want his or her patient to suffer, much less to die on the operation table or in the hospital or clinic. The Supreme Court is a very significant judgment, and it's important that you make a note of some of these judgments, because to a large extent it would serve to sort of instill confidence in you, because I know a lot of doctors are very troubled by this Damocles sword of legal action. The Supreme Court in Martin F. D'Souza versus Mohammed Ishfaq had said, different doctors have different approaches, some more radical, some more conservative. All doctors cannot be fitted into a straight-jacketed formula and penalized for departing from that formula. So you go to, for instance, you come to lawyers and ask for an opinion. You go to 3 lawyers, you'll get 3 opinions. So just because a doctor deviates from a particular approach in treatment or in surgery, that does not constitute medical negligence. You have this assurance from the highest court of the land. Now, consumer courts, consumer fora, consist of primarily laymen in the field of medicine. Okay, they have to rely on medical opinions of experts, from people like you, who many believe may be prejudiced. They say there is honor among thieves. It happens to in every profession. So it's very difficult actually to get one doctor to testify against another doctor. This is a practical reality. But will an error, and this applies, as I said, to every profession. It happens, custodial torture in police stations, is very difficult to get convictions because the police will not really let down their own. So will an error of judgment constitute medical negligence? I think this is a question that vexes most doctors. Will an error of judgment, an innocent error of judgment, constitute medical negligence? In my opinion, it would not. Today, please be reassured that at least in the National Consumer Disputes Redressal Commission, there is a medical doctor who sits on the bench for medical negligence cases. So it's not as if a layman is sitting and deciding over a complex medico-legal issue. You have Dr. S.M. Kantikar, a brilliant judge, who's sitting there as a present expert presiding officer for medical negligence cases in the highest consumer fora of the country. Now, what exactly constitutes medical negligence? If it's not misdiagnosis, if it's not error of judgment, we go by the Bolam test. What is this Bolam test? The Bolam test simply states that a professional need not possess the highest expertise. It will suffice if that professional exercises the ordinary skill of an ordinary competent person exercising that particular art. So it's that minimum, in simple layman's terms, it's a minimum standard of care that has to be determined. With reference to the National Consumer Disputes Redressal Commission decision in Sarwat Ali Khan versus Professor Gogoi, there were certain broad guidelines that were framed by the courts, such as prescription of drugs only after actual examination of a patient, not on the telephone, cross-checking symptoms with tests and investigate diagnostic test results, not experimenting, not making patients guinea pigs, timely consultation with experts, like for instance, does a patient who has suffered a heart attack need angioplasty or an open heart surgery or CABG? So the timely consultation with experts, maintenance of records for diagnosis and treatment. Now again, I'd like to put many doctors at rest, because I know, see, a lot of these things which circulate today on the social media and WhatsApp, and I know a lot of my doctor friends have been asking me about this right from 2018 onwards. I in fact even wrote a column about it in the Deccan Chronicle. The Mumbai High Court in Pavaskar versus State of Maharashtra had actually, in the judgment, actually it's not the High Court, but the judgment had led to various interpretations and triggered needless panic in medical circles. Many people believed and they misinterpreted that judgment, which was actually a judgment, anticipatory bail. It suggested that many people thought that telephone consultation would make the doctor liable for prosecution under Section 304 of the Indian Penal Code. What is 304 of the IPC? Culpable homicide not amounting to murder. The context was completely different in this particular case. It was a finding, as I said, in an anticipatory bail plea of a doctor couple who had allegedly advised the patient with post-delivery complications not to go to another hospital although they were away, and prescribed medicines on the phone to the chemist. This was the gist of that case. The patient, ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately died, and the police booked the doctors under Section 304 IPC. So clinical examination before prescribing drugs is the ideal practice. But please understand, and patients know it as well, as do the courts, that life is full of surprises and emergencies, and doctors cannot be omnipresent. Today during COVID, we are actually telling people do teleconsultation, because it's not safe for people to go to hospitals, at least for those with serious comorbidities. If there's something that can be handled on the telephone, that's great, and we are requesting, we are pleading with doctors to do this, and many doctors are obliging. So please be at rest. Telephone consultation cannot be criminalized. If it is, you can come to me. Telephone consultation may save lives, especially in cases where the patient cannot travel or where there is a delay in getting direct medical treatment. Now, let's face it, we've all seen, and I have witnessed it firsthand, even in the emergency wards of hospitals. Let's say somebody is admitted in the dead of night with a heart attack or some other emergency. The specialist is not available round the clock. There is a reasonably experienced junior doctor who's there in the ER, but of course you'll have billboards saying 24/7 emergency care and all that. The duty doctor would invariably WhatsApp or call the expert, let's say a cardiologist. They would WhatsApp the ECG report immediately, pulse and blood pressure readings and other parameters, and based on the telephonic advice, administer that first aid or shift the patient to the intensive care unit. This is the regular protocol that is being followed. So it's not as if telephone consultation is something new. It happens regularly, even in regular treatment in hospitals. Now, I will be brief because I know that you're running out of time and I don't want to stand in the way of your Sunday dinner. What can you do as a doctor? What can you do as a hospital administrator? I think that's something that you want to know, Sean, of all the legalese that I've given you. I've tried to make it as simple as possible for doctors to understand. For the doctors in hospitals, 1, please come clean with records. It shows that you have nothing to hide. Do not fabricate things to try and escape any sort of legal liability, because let me tell you, that could backfire. that could backfire. Your antenna should go up the moment patients make a request, either the deceased patient's relatives or a discharged patient. They make a request for complete medical records, and under section 1.3.2 of the Code of Medical Ethics and Regulations of the Medical Council of India, you're aware that doctors in hospitals are bound to hand over medical records to the patient or relatives within 72 hours. Within 72 hours. Aside of this, please remember that today this is the age of smartphones. Patients take immediately photos of everything. Every bill, everything is all stored and kept. So don't underestimate the patient. Come clean with records. Second, please do not fall back on consent form disclaimers. We know that consent forms, most things, even employment contracts, there are several things. The Law Commission in its 200 report has also spoken about this, about these unilateral standard form agreements. They are lopsided, they are signed hurriedly. I myself have signed them. You're literally, the patient is, or the attendant is literally standing on one leg, on one foot, because you have to remove your slippers or the footwear and go into a particular the cath lab or whatever, and then they give it to you, hold it against the wall and sign it. No question of even reading the fine print. Now, very interestingly, a couple of months ago, this is the latest judgment of the National Consumer Disputes Redressal Commission. The case of Vinod Khanna versus R.G. Stone Urology and Laparoscopy, 2020 judgment. The court, the commission found their pre-printed informed consent cum undertaking form to be unfair, one-sided, arbitrary, high-handed. And they said it was a violation of, under Unfair Trade Practice of the Old Consumer Protection Act, 1986 Act, under Section 21R. And you know what? They imposed a fine, a compensation of 10 lakh rupees on that hospital to be paid to the Consumer Forum. So don't fall back on these disclaimers. It's like taking an umbrella during a cyclone. Okay? It doesn't cover your tracks completely, only to a very limited extent. Now, pay attention to your paperwork. I told you earlier how patients keep records themselves. Keep copies yourself. You may leave the hospital and go to another hospital. And that hospital then, you may not have probably left, if you left on not very cordial terms, slightly unceremonious. They may not oblige, they may not give you all the copies that you want, all the documents that you want, they may hold back something. Your junior doctors may turn hostile, there may be some misunderstanding. So make sure that for all your surgeries that you have your own set of documents, you have your paperwork with you at your place, keep them intact. I'm sure 99% of you do this, but I'm just flagging this because I know some of the best doctors sometimes lose out on these small things, and these are things that lawyers will look for to actually nail you. MRI reports, for instance, you prescribe someone an MRI, go through the images and don't rely on the radiologist's impression. Make sure that the correct doctor's name is put there, the referral, the person who is referring. Now this is very important. Whether it's a discharge summary or whether it's a death report, do not allow as a practice a junior doctor to sign for you. I know of cases, I'm in fact handling some cases where a junior doctor has signed for the senior doctor who was supposed to do a procedure. He was blissfully ignorant of what happened. They signed and they gave a particular reason as a cause of death, and that is still haunting that particular doctor. It's being agitated in the highest forum today. So don't make that mistake of, as a practice, you have to sign something, make sure you sign directly. Don't delegate that signing authority to anyone, because it can come back to bite you and bite you really hard. Insist as far as possible, if there is some a death that has happened at the operation table during treatment that you feel could be challenged in court, insist always on a post-mortem. Come clean, call the police if required, don't hide anything. Now what will happen at a practical level? Many families, many attendants of the deceased would plead with you, we don't want this post-mortem, we don't want, please, it affects this, sentiment is involved and all that. Fine, respect that, but get it in writing from them. Get it in writing from them that they don't want a post-mortem for whatever reason. Because tomorrow, there's a 2-year limitation period for a person to file a consumer complaint. Tomorrow, they will go back to the court and say, no, post-mortem was done, this was happened, that happened, and therefore the doctor will then, you can't go and tell the court, look, they didn't want it. Court doesn't rely on this oral testimony, they'll say, give us something in writing. So therefore, it's important to get it in writing if the attendants or the relatives of the deceased ask you not to have a postmortem, they make a request, let them do it and write it. Be aware of your legal rights. Aside of the Consumer Protection Act, I'm sure you have, in medical college they teach you in medical legal cases, but there is a difference between 304, which is culpable homicide not amounting to murder, which is a very rarely invoked provision for doctors, because people are aware doctors try their best to save lives. As school children, when we grew up, I remember some of the things that I heard. Before a doctor goes into the operation theatre, they would tell themselves, or they would tell the patient's relatives or the patient, I will do my best and let God do the rest. So there are certain things that are in their hands, and there are certain things that are not in their hands. The human body is so complex. Section, if criminal action is to be taken against a doctor, aside of consumer action, based on the Consumer Court, please remember the Consumer Protection Act is a right that is not in derogation of any other remedy. So technically you can have a criminal case plus a consumer case against a doctor for medical negligence. Both are possible. Now 304A of the IPC, okay, this involves criminal liability that can be fastened on doctors. But this is another judgment that will come to your rescue. Jacob Matthew case. Jacob Matthew case is something that you should take a printout and keep. Supreme Court had given detailed guidelines in this Jacob Matthew case and very clearly protected doctors against any possible police harassment. Because to convict a doctor in a criminal case, it must also be proved that the negligence was not just gross. First, you have to prove that it was gross negligence. You also have to prove that the doctor was reckless, that there was a clear case of recklessness of the doctor in that case. So these are some of the things that doctors and patients, doctors and hospitals need to keep in mind. Now, doctors can also be patients. Remember that landmark case for Kunal Saha, his wife was a patient, his wife died. So for doctors, for patients, for families, these are some of the things that you need to keep in mind. The first step in proving medical negligence is collecting evidence. What is this evidence? Primarily, all the prescriptions, the discharge summary, the death certificate, test results, all these you need as a file. But as I told you earlier, under the medical ethics, the code of medical ethics, patients have a right to actually have a statutory right to get an entire set of the medical records within 72 hours from their asking for it. And this is actually a very patient-friendly legal measure. You can't really hide anything. Also, I'd like to tell doctors, your nurses' notes are very important. Please also instruct the people working for you that they need to be very accurate in their nurses' notes. As far as possible, try and make it as legible as possible. I know there's this joke about doctors' prescriptions and the handwriting and all that. Now most doctors are relying on printouts rather than handwritten ones. I have seen doctors who've got calligraphy, not handwriting, but some doctors what they call foul scratch. Make sure the nurses' notes are intact. In fact, nurses' notes have come in handy in a case that I know of where the patient left the hospital for a diagnostic test, didn't return after for 5 hours, he had vanished. But then fortunately the nurse's notes reflected the timing, so it's important that the nurse's notes are comprehensive enough. That will help you at some point. The second aspect comes expert medical opinion. As I said earlier, it is not easy to get one doctor to testify against another, like it is not easy to get one police officer to testify another against, get a lawyer to file a complaint against another lawyer before the bar council. This is a reality. But when, as a patient's relative, as somebody wants to file a case of negligence, when you need that medical expert opinion, pick a credible specialist. A credible specialist, not a general practitioner. So let's say for example, if you're dealing with a case of DVT, deep vein thrombosis, get a vascular surgeon or get a cardiac surgeon, get maybe an orthopedician, somebody who's connected with that particular condition. Don't get a general practitioner. A lot of people make this mistake and it goes against them. Thirdly, the claim for compensation. That is crucial to show credibility of the complainant. That claim for compensation, ladies and gentlemen, must be reasonable, because compensation should be a relief, not a bonanza. So let's say the age of the person is very crucial. How many years of life he had left? What are the earnings of that person? at the time of death? What was his career trajectory like? What was his earning potential for the next whatever years? If he's an employee of a company till the age of 60, there's a calculation to be done. Or if he's, let's say, a lawyer has no retirement age, a doctor has no retirement age. So for professionals like this, obviously the compensation can be paid at a much higher level. But the principle relied on by the Supreme Court in cases of compensation, especially in medical negligence, is in a landmark case, a seminal case of Malay Kumar Ganguly versus Sukumar Mukherjee. And that principle was restitutio in integrum, which means a person is entitled to damages and it should put him as nearly as possible to that same position as he would have been had this not happened, had he not sustained that wrong. So put him back in that original position. That is a principle broadly to be followed in a case of compensation. Well, ladies and gentlemen, our courts have consistently come to the rescue of victims of medical negligence. There is no doubt about this. There are no two opinions about this. Our courts have awarded substantial compensation. But the higher judiciary, for instance, in the landmark Martin D'Souza case, has also recognized the possibility that, and I quote, even the best professionals, what to say of the average ones, sometimes have failures. But my appeal, in fact, as a takeaway from this webinar, my appeal to doctors, especially to the big corporate hospitals, is that you know if a case falls under the category of medical negligence or not. You would know, right? Your gut feel would tell you, your experience would tell you that. As far as possible, if you can, and if it's a genuine case of negligence, sympathize, show empathy with the patient, the family of the patient. If it's possible, doctors have a wide network, sponsor the education of the children. Plead with the hospital management to probably use their insurance to settle the matter amicably. It's good for all. There's no Damocles sword over you, and remember, adverse publicity that an adverse judgment in the consumer forum can affect the reputation of a doctor for which he or she would have slogged for decades on end. That's not something that you want. It's not fair to the doctor as well, because character assassination, which can happen today, you have to contend with the social media as well, can virtually finish off the career of any professional, not just doctors. So as far as possible, it's also the right thing for you to do. If you know that it's a genuine case of medical negligence, don't fight it. Try and make amends in whatever way you can. And at the end of the day, you are accountable to God as well as your conscience. So that is something I would make an appeal to all doctors whenever it's there. I know several cases where I have told doctors this, and some of them tell me, look, we don't mind, but then the hospital would say, look, we're setting a bad precedent. I don't think that would be a bad precedent. I don't think goodness, I don't think fairness, I don't think justice would ever be a bad precedent in this world. So as far as possible, do justice if you know it's a case. If it's not, fight to the finish. Fight to the finish, because you have your reputation to protect. And as I said at the very outset, most doctors, a majority of doctors, nobody wants the patient to suffer or die. So hold on to that. And at the end of the day, please understand that in our world where doctors are worshipped, are treated like God by their patients, their responsibility is sky high. Your Hippocratic oath cannot be reduced to a hypocritical oath. That's something that we should always keep in mind. But at the same time, the law must only be a watchdog. The law must not be a bloodhound. Thank you.